I hate everything and everyone. Hi, I'm Payana. I am a book-obsessed metalhead. So last time I read a David Duchovny novel, it was Holy Cow, and it was a book about a cow going to India from the USA to escape the meat industry. It was not good, to put it mildly. I loathed the experience to the very core of my being, but then I found out that David Duchovny had written a fantasy novel, an urban fantasy novel, that did not contain vampires. Wow! So I thought I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. I very regret that decision. Miss Subways. So this book is about a 38-year-old New York teacher called Emma, and she is in a relationship with this dude called Con, and he's just published a book about ancient gods and deities and religion and how they have morphed and changed and been modified over the years. And it's actually quite good. Like, there's a whole chapter devoted to Con, like, reading from his book and, like, explaining what it's about. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Emma goes to meet him at this conference, but he's, like, spending time with this African woman, and she's like, your book is amazing, and we need to make it into a movie, and come and have dinner with me. Emma is just making a complete fool of herself. She doesn't go to dinner with them for some reason. She just decides to go home, even though she's invited. She gets home, goes to sleep, and then she gets a knock on the door, and the person behind the door is Banshee. So Banshee is a character from Irish folklore who is traditionally female, but was male in this version. Gods have morphed and changed over time, okay? So Banshee, true to his word in this case, tells Emma that Con is going to die and shows her like this video of him being hit by a car after being pushed in front of it by the African lady he was with, who turns out to be Anansi, the spider goddess of mischief from West African mythology. So Emma can decide to either just let Con die and just let things happen because fate or whatever, or she can decide to save his life, but if she does this, then they will never know each other over the course of like their entire lifetimes. So she chooses to save him. Banshee tells her that the gods have been brought over to the USA along with immigrants, and they're all now living in New York City. We're also told that Con's book was actually originally Emma's idea, but she like didn't have the time to do all the research for it, so she essentially sacrificed her time by working 3 jobs in order to allow Con the 10 years or however long it was for him to research this book and then write it and publish it. So she essentially sacrificed her writing endeavors so that he could have his. There's nothing very special about Con. Like, he is basically a waste of space. Like, he's not interesting, he's not funny, he doesn't bring anything to Emma's life. It doesn't feel like she loses anything when she wakes up the next day having like never known him and never being in a relationship with him. So what I thought was gonna happen was she was going to then spend time with the gods in New York and like see what they've become, and like that they would like have her write Con's book but like get it right because she would actually talk to them and kind of like breaking their silence of having been washed up and forgotten for all of these decades or centuries or however long it's been. There was potential here, but that's not what happens. Instead of that, what we get is her just living her life but without Con. She just like goes and works, and yeah. We get a few kind of nuggets. There's one scene where her dad, like, she sees her dad in a park having an orgy in a fountain with this kind of dragon deity. What this is about exactly, we never find out. She vaguely sees an Egyptian god on the subway, and then there's another chapter with like Banshee where she supposedly is introduced to the entrance to the underworld or whatever it is, the god dimension. And then she wakes up the next day and she's like written a bunch of stuff about it. So she does write this book and she does get to spend time with the gods, but she doesn't remember any of it. And as a reader, we don't get to read about it. What we do get to read about, though, is her bumping into Con on the subway and being like, oh, it's weird, I feel like I know you. And him being like, oh yeah, it is weird, I feel like I know you. And then they sleep together, and then she finds out that he's actually the stepdad of one of her pupils, and that Anansi is this kid's mother? Like, what? Such a waste! What I wanted was, here are the traditional ancient gods of the world that have all been united in this melting pot of culture that is NYC, and how are they adapting and living after being essentially either forgotten or modified or morphed or whatever. How are they living? How are they coping in New York City? What I got was, oh my god, I fucked one of my pupil's stepdads. What am I gonna do? Nobody cares. So much wasted potential, David. I had such high hopes for you. So that happens, and then eventually she meets like the other gods in an abandoned subway station, and like that's it. The gods are like living in, and like essentially as homeless people in an abandoned subway station, and then they give her this token thing, and it's like, you'll miss subways. So Anansi is a mom, and we learn from Con that she like apparently still has quite a lot of power and influence. Why, how, on whom, where. And Banshee is kind of weird because Ema kind of thinks at one point that Banshee works as a doorman in her building because he has a doorman's uniform, but she also thinks that he might be the headmaster of the school where she works. We get kind of hints that he might be both, but we never really get a clear answer. And in the end, it turns out that Banshee is in love with Anansi, and the whole thing about like getting Con to survive with Ema and them not knowing each other, like all of that was like a bid to get Anansi's attention or something. It's very strange. I also don't really understand why Ema and Con need to get back together. Even like when she meets him again on the subway and they start having this kind of weird relationship, he is a husk of a human being. He is not interesting. He is not, he just brings nothing to Ema. And so like, and he even admits that at the end. He's like, oh, I brought nothing to the relationship, did I? No, you did not. So why are you here? Why does she need this man? She's like making excuses for him to Anansi and being like, well, you're not letting him realize his full potential. Why is this about Con? This book is not about Con. It's about Ema. Why are we spending so much time focusing on Con? He is not interesting at all. I wanted to read about the gods of New York, not about this waste of space of a human being. So that sums up Miss Subway's, yeah. This book is a lot better than Holy Cow, though. I will give it that. Whenever Ema's on the subway, there are all these quotes from like classic literature on the subway, and the first one is from Kafka's Metamorphoses. And she spends a lot of time kind of dwelling on these quotes and thinking about them and what they mean to her. It goes a lot into like her personal interpretations of them, and the Kafka one actually makes sense within the context of the rest of the novel, because the character in Metamorphosis turns into a giant cockroach, and she starts thinking about cockroaches and thinking, oh yeah, cockroaches weren't native, were they? They were brought over on ships. A lot of things were brought over on ships, a lot of animals and plants that aren't native to the Americas that came over, that either integrated or started causing problems. And I thought this was really good foreshadowing. It's like, yeah, that's how the gods came over. Again, they brought over on these ships, and then they either cause chaos like Anansi and Banshee, or they just live and adapt themselves. And it makes sense. And unlike all the quotes in Holy Cow, which didn't make, like, there was an awful lot of references to pop culture, which just did not really make any sense within the context of the book, because the main character was a cow, and like cows don't watch Star Wars. And then like it's weirdly explained that the cow was like shown movies and pop culture stuff so that she could put references, like, so basically this weird explanation for like crowbarring Star Wars references in a book that is told by a cow. So, okay, that kind of makes sense for Elsie, but not when, like, her best friend and her mom are quoting from West Side Story. And all the quotes in this book, all the references make sense. They're all coming, or most of them are coming from classic literature, and we're told at the beginning that she is a classic literature nut, and she's also a teacher, so it makes sense that she would know classic literature. It makes sense that she would know poetry. But also, it's a lot. Like, there is an awful lot of quotes from W.B. Yeats, like a lot of W.B. Yeats for some reason. It kind of made me think of all the lit teachers that we had at college who were like getting us to analyze all of these texts because the author wrote this and that at this point. I love classic literature and I hated these classes. I loathe this from the core of my being. Like, interpreting books should be encouraged to be more of like a personal thing, because like if you start like putting specific meanings on stuff other than like the obvious ones, it is a slippery slope towards chaos. Pretty much everybody I know loathe this kind of mentality and this type of teaching, but reading this book, it felt like David Duchovny was the only person who was like sitting at the front of the class actually enjoying being force-fed this shit. These are the people that then become lit teachers and perpetuate the misery. So I'm sorry, David, that you missed your calling as a teacher. Actually, was David Duchovny ever a teacher? I don't actually know. Is he a lit teacher somewhere? It feels like he should be, because crowbarring these types of references down people's throats. You missed your calling, David. It wasn't writing, it was teaching. But apart from that, this book is pretty much 300 pages of not much. The only interesting bits were the interactions that Emma had with the gods. And there's like 3 of them in a 300-page book, which is basically about a teacher just being in New York and hooking up with this guy who is essentially only in this book to cause drama. There was potential in this, David. There was so much potential for a good, funny, exciting novel, and this is what we get? Dude! The whole thing about the subway, also, like, I don't really understand what the deal is, because, like, again, every time she's taking the subway, she sees the picture of Miss Subways, and like they're doing a new casting to get the new Miss Subways, and they're like, yay, they used to be Miss Subway, and then they did away with that because it's misogynistic. But then now they're having it back because nostalgia. And she doesn't even enter, which also is kind of weird to me, because she's always like making this thing about her being ugly and her being like unfit. But so she does yoga twice a week. She goes to a spinning class, and she also like goes to the gym several times a week. So like, she sounds like someone who is super fit. So like, why isn't she going? Why isn't she applying to be Miss Subways? Like, what's holding her back? So yeah, that was my experience of Miss Subways by David Duchovny. I don't think I'm going to be reading any of his books ever again. It just causes me misery. But don't hesitate to tell me what you thought. What was the book that caused you the most misery? That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't hesitate to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one. Mwah.